Jordan stepped into the laundromat, the door creaking slightly as it swung open against the damp night air. Rain drizzled outside, creating a symphony of pattering sounds on the roof. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a pale glow on the rows of washing machines that hummed in a steady rhythm. The familiar scent of detergent filled the small space, wrapping around him like a warm blanket. It was one of the few constants in his life, a place that offered solace amidst the chaos. He walked to the far corner, where he usually positioned himself, away from the main flow of foot traffic. Jordan was a tall, lean 16-year-old with a mop of curly hair and deep brown eyes that held a quiet intensity. He often felt like a shadow in a world that moved too fast around him. The laundromat was his refuge, a sanctuary where he could blend into the background, observing life unfold without having to be a part of it. As he unloaded his small bag of clothes, he glanced around the room. There were only a few patrons tonight. An elderly woman sat by the window, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She always offered him a smile, her eyes sparkling with kindness. "Good evening, Jordan," she called out, her voice warm and inviting. "How are you tonight?" "Hey, Mrs. Patterson," he replied, a small smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "I'm good, just doing some laundry." He tossed a few items into the nearest machine, the sound of fabric hitting the metal drum echoing in the quiet space. Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. "You're such a responsible young man. Not many kids your age think about their clothes." Her smile faded slightly as she continued, "But you shouldn't be out here alone so late. It's not safe." Jordan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. He appreciated her concern, but didn't want to delve into the reasons behind his nightly visits. "I'll be fine," he assured her, though he didn't quite believe it himself. He felt the weight of her words linger in the air, a reminder of the world outside the laundromat's comforting walls. In another corner, a group of teenagers sat clustered together, laughing and scrolling through their phones. They barely acknowledged Jordan's presence, engrossed in their own world. He felt a familiar twinge of isolation as their laughter echoed around him. It was a strange dichotomy. He was both invisible and seen. Anyone could tell he was there, but no one seemed to care enough to engage. He turned his attention back to the washing machines, watching the clothes swirl in a dance of colors and fabrics. Each garment represented a different story, a different life, some vibrant, others worn and faded. He often wondered what stories were hidden behind the faces of the people he encountered, but he never mustered the courage to ask. As the machines continued their cycles, Jordan pulled out his phone and scrolled through the few photos he had saved. Most were of his mother, her smiling face a stark contrast to the struggles they faced at home. He missed the days when laughter filled their small apartment, when they could afford to enjoy simple pleasures like a home-cooked meal or a movie night. Now, those moments seemed like distant memories, overshadowed by the reality of their current situation. The hum of the machines was suddenly interrupted by the sound of the door swinging open. A gust of wind swept through the laundromat, and Jordan glanced up to see Sheriff Thompson entering, his presence commanding and authoritative. The sheriff was a familiar figure in the small town, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and unwavering commitment to keeping the community safe. "Evening, folks," Sheriff Thompson greeted the room, his voice deep and resonant. He scanned the area, his eyes landing on Jordan. A frown creased his brow as he took in the sight of the young boy alone in the laundromat at such a late hour. Jordan felt a knot tighten in his stomach, the sheriff's gaze making him acutely aware of his solitude. The sheriff approached him, his expression shifting from concern to curiosity. "You're out late, Jordan. Everything all right?" "Just doing laundry," Jordan replied evasively, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to invite questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Every night?" the sheriff pressed, his brows furrowing. "Don't you have homework or something?" "Yes, sir. I'll do it after," Jordan said, shifting awkwardly on his feet. He felt exposed under the sheriff's scrutiny, as if his entire life were laid bare for the officer to dissect. Sheriff Thompson studied him for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "Just be careful, okay? It's not always safe out here at night." "Okay," Jordan muttered, grateful when the sheriff finally turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, A wave of relief washed over him. He didn't want to discuss his life with anyone, especially not with someone who held authority. They wouldn't understand. How could they? Minutes later, the rhythmic sound of the washing machines filled the silence again, and Jordan lost himself in his thoughts. He wondered why he kept returning to this place, why he felt the need to wash the few clothes he owned every night. Perhaps it was a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a life that felt anything but. Or maybe it was a way to hold on to a shred of self-respect, to feel like he was doing something right in a world that often made him feel powerless. As the cycle came to an end, he moved to transfer his clothes to the dryer, the warmth of the machines offering a brief respite from the chill outside. He glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who had returned to her knitting, her needles clicking softly as she worked. The sight brought him comfort. She was a constant in his life, an embodiment of the community he often felt detached from. "Are you heading to school tomorrow?" she asked, looking up from her work. "Yeah," he replied, folding his shirt with care. "Just another day." She smiled gently, her eyes twinkling. "You know, Jordan, you're going to go far. You have a good heart. Just remember to look out for yourself, too." "Thanks, Mrs. Patterson," he said, touched by her words. He wanted to believe what she said, but it was hard to see a future when every day felt like a battle for survival. Once his clothes were dry and folded, he took a deep breath, savoring the warmth that enveloped him. He felt a sense of accomplishment, a momentary distraction from the weight of the world outside. He gathered his belongings, ready to head back into the rain-soaked streets. As he stepped outside, the wind whipped at his face, and he pulled his jacket tighter around him. The night was darker now, the streetlights flickering as if struggling against the shadows. He started walking home, the sound of his feet splashing in puddles echoing in the stillness. Just as he rounded the corner, a familiar vehicle passed by, a marked police car. Sheriff Thompson was behind the wheel, his eyes scanning the streets. When he caught sight of Jordan, he slowed down, a frown returning to his face. Jordan felt a mix of annoyance and unease. He didn't want to be the subject of the sheriff's concern. The sheriff rolled down his window, his voice booming over the sound of the rain. "You sure you're all right out here, kid?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Jordan replied, a hint of defiance in his tone. He picked up his pace, eager to put distance between them. He could sense the sheriff's gaze lingering on him, a feeling of scrutiny that made him uncomfortable. "Just remember what I said," Sheriff Thompson called after him before driving off into the night, leaving Jordan alone with his thoughts once more. As he walked, the weight of the world settled back onto his shoulders. The town felt both familiar and foreign, a place where he was constantly at odds with himself. He didn't want pity, nor did he want to be seen as a victim. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the sheriff was onto something, that there was a story within him waiting to be uncovered. Jordan finally reached his small apartment, the building looming in the darkness like a sentinel. As he stepped inside, the warmth enveloped him, but it did little to ease the ache in his heart. He set his clothes down gently, careful not to make too much noise. "Jordan," a soft voice called from the other room, pulling him from his thoughts. "Yeah, Mom? I'm home," he replied, forcing a smile even though she couldn't see him. He stepped into the living room, where his mother sat on the couch, a thin blanket draped over her legs. She looked tired but managed to return his smile, her eyes filled with love and concern. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Just the usual, school and laundry," he replied, brushing off her question. He didn't want to worry her with the details of his life, especially the parts that made him feel weak. She nodded, though he could see the worry etched on her face. "I'm glad you're taking care of your clothes. It's important to look sharp for school." Jordan's heart tightened at her words. He wanted to tell her that he was trying, that he was doing everything he could to hold their lives together, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he settled onto the couch beside her, feeling the warmth radiating from her presence. As they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their struggles loomed over them like a dark cloud. Jordan knew he had to be strong for his mother, to keep pushing forward despite the odds stacked against. Sheriff Thompson leaned back in his squeaky office chair, the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds and casting striped shadows on the cluttered desk. The chatter of his deputy, Officer Reyes, filled the air as they reviewed the recent surge in youth-related incidents in their small town. "You know, I can't shake the feeling that there's something off about that boy, Jordan," Sheriff Thompson said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I saw him again last night at the laundromat, just like every other night. What kind of kid does laundry at this hour?" Officer Reyes, a young man with a sharp mind and an eagerness to learn, looked up from the pile of reports in front of him, curiosity glimmering in his eyes. "You think he's involved in something? Maybe he's just keeping busy. Kids these days have different ways of coping." "It's not just that," Thompson replied, his brow furrowing in concern. "It's the pattern, the late-night visits, the isolation. I can't help but worry that he's trying to escape something. We've seen a rise in delinquency lately, and I'd hate to see him fall into that trap." Reyes nodded, contemplating the sheriff's words. "Maybe we should look into his background, find out if there's something going on at home." "Yeah, I think that's a good idea," Thompson agreed, pulling out a notepad. "If we can understand what's happening with him, we might be able to prevent something worse. But first, I want to see what he does tonight. I'll follow him after he leaves the laundromat." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the sleepy town, Sheriff Thompson parked his patrol car a couple of blocks from the laundromat. He settled into the driver's seat, the engine humming softly as he waited. The streets were quiet, and the occasional sound of a dog barking in the distance broke the stillness. He watched as the neon sign of the laundromat flickered to life. Jordan arrived, his silhouette framed by the dim light. The sheriff observed closely, noting the boy's careful movements as he stepped inside. The old bell above the door jingled, and a rush of warm air escaped into the cool evening. Thompson leaned forward, his heart pounding slightly with anticipation. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a kid doing laundry. The sheriff had seen a lot in his years on the force, and he had learned to trust his instincts. Inside the laundromat, Jordan moved with a quiet resolve. He tossed a bag of clothes into one of the washers and then busied himself with the detergent. The machines whirred to life, and as he settled onto a plastic chair, a look of concentration washed over his face. It was as if he was performing a ritual. The way he folded his clothes, the meticulous attention to detail, spoke volumes about his character. After a few minutes, Jordan pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. A hint of a smile appeared on his face, but it quickly faded, replaced by a contemplative expression. Sheriff Thompson's heart ached as he watched the boy. What was going through his mind? What burdens was he carrying? The laundromat was mostly empty save for an elderly woman who often chatted with Jordan. Thompson recalled seeing her and how she always greeted the boy warmly. It seemed like she was the only one who acknowledged him in that space. The sheriff wondered if she knew more about Jordan's life than he did. Suddenly, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he answered it, his voice barely rising above a whisper. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, I'm at the laundromat. I'll be done soon." There was a pause, and the sheriff strained to hear the muffled reply on the other end. I know. I'll make sure to be careful. Love you." Thompson's heart sank. The way Jordan spoke, the care in his tone, hinted at a deeper relationship with his mother. It was clear that he was carrying the weight of responsibility at such a young age. As the minutes passed, the sheriff continued to observe from his car, feeling a mix of admiration and sadness for the teenager. Jordan seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at the washing machines as if they held the answers to questions he hadn't yet voiced. After what felt like an eternity, the washing machine finally buzzed. Jordan stood, his movements deliberate as he transferred his clothes to the dryer. The sheriff could see the tension in his shoulders, but there was also a determination in his posture. This was a routine for Jordan, a necessary part of his life that he had embraced despite the circumstances. Thompson pulled out his phone, jotting down notes about what he had observed. He needed to understand more about this boy, and he was determined to help him if it came to that. Outside, the evening air had turned crisp, and the leaves rustled gently in the breeze. Jordan finished folding his clothes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sheriff felt an overwhelming urge to approach him, to ask him questions, but he knew he needed to tread carefully. The boy had already shown signs of being guarded, and he didn't want to push him away. As Jordan exited the laundromat, he glanced around, his expression hinting at awareness of his surroundings. Sheriff Thompson quickly shifted in his seat, ensuring he blended into the night. He followed Jordan from a distance, careful not to make his presence known. Jordan walked a few blocks before turning down a narrow alley that led to a small apartment complex. The sheriff parked his car and stepped out to watch as Jordan entered the building. He leaned against his vehicle, contemplating his next move. Should he confront the boy, or should he gather more information before intervening? The night air was thick with uncertainty, and Thompson felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had dedicated his life to serving and protecting his community, but this situation was different. It struck a personal chord in him. As the sheriff stood in the shadows, he thought about his own childhood, the struggles his family faced, and how he had vowed to make a difference in the lives of others. He recalled his mother's sacrifices, the late nights she spent working to provide for their family. He'd been lucky, but that luck wasn't universal. He made a decision then. He would learn more about Jordan, but he would also be there for him when the time was right. He would not let this boy slip through the cracks like so many others had. The next day, as the sun rose over the town, Sheriff Thompson sought out information on Jordan's family. He visited the local schools, spoke with teachers, and reached out to community members. Every person he spoke to painted a picture of a bright young man who was doing his best in a difficult situation. It was clear that Jordan was well-liked, but the whispers of financial struggles and family troubles loomed large. "Have you spoken to his mother?" one of the teachers asked, concern etched on her face. "I think she's been ill for some time. Jordan's really taken on a lot of responsibility at home." Thompson nodded, his heart heavy with the realization of what Jordan was likely facing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and each new revelation only deepened his empathy for the boy. As the day wore on, the sheriff found himself consumed with thoughts of Jordan. He couldn't shake the image of the boy's quiet determination and the responsibility he bore. It was a burden that no child should have to carry. Determined to confront the issue head-on, Thompson planned to visit the laundromat again that night. He hoped to find Jordan and this time engage him in conversation. He wanted to let the boy know he was not alone, that there were people in the community who cared and wanted to help. As the clock ticked closer to evening, the sheriff felt a mix of apprehension and hope. He knew that reaching out to Jordan would require sensitivity, but he felt a sense of urgency. The boy needed support, and Thompson was ready to provide it, no matter the outcome. Later that night, as he parked near the laundromat once more, he felt the weight of responsibility resting heavily on his shoulders. He stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Tonight, he would make a connection. Tonight, he would show Jordan that he was seen, that he mattered. With resolve in his heart, Sheriff Thompson entered the laundromat, ready to confront the truth and offer a lifeline to a boy who needed it most. Sheriff Thompson parked his patrol car near the laundromat, its blue and white paint glistening under the flickering neon sign that read, "Open 24 hours." The familiar buzz of washing machines filled the air, mingling with the scent of fresh detergent and the faint odor of fabric softener. He stepped out, the cool night air brushing against his face as he approached the entrance. Tonight was the night he had decided to confront Jordan, to understand why the boy seemed to turn to this place as his refuge. Inside, Jordan was hunched over a folding table, meticulously arranging his freshly cleaned clothes. His brow furrowed in concentration, he folded each piece with care, as if they were the only precious items he owned. Sheriff Thompson paused for a moment, observing the teenager's dedication. For a boy of his age, this was an unusual sight. Most teenagers would be out with friends, enjoying their youth, not tending to the mundane chores of adulthood. "Hey there, Jordan," Sheriff Thompson greeted, his voice warm but cautious, knowing very well that he needed to tread lightly. Jordan looked up, surprise flickering across his face. He straightened, his hands dropping to his sides as he tried to mask his nervousness. Hey, Sheriff." His voice was barely above a whisper. The sheriff took a seat across the table, giving the boy some space while also making it clear he was there to talk. "You've been coming here a lot, haven't you? Just wanted to check in on you." "Yeah, I guess so," Jordan replied, shrugging slightly, his gaze shifting to the floor. The sheriff noticed how the boy's fingers fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, a telltale sign of his discomfort. "What brings you here every night?" The sheriff leaned forward, genuinely curious. I mean, it's not exactly the place where most kids hang out. Jordan took a deep breath, seemingly weighing his words carefully. I like it here. It's peaceful. Sheriff Thompson sensed there was more to it than that. The laundromat was indeed quiet, but it was also a place where people came to clean their clothes, not necessarily a sanctuary. I understand, but you don't have to do this alone. There are people who can help if you need it. Jordan's eyes darted around the room, avoiding the sheriff's gaze. I'm fine, he insisted, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. I can handle it. Handle what, exactly? The sheriff pressed gently, wanting to break through the wall the boy had built around himself. Jordan swallowed hard, his expression hardening. Just stuff. You wouldn't understand. Thompson's heart sank a little. He knew that feeling all too well, the desire to keep one's struggles hidden from the world, to carry the weight alone. Try me, he urged, his voice softening. I'm here to listen if you want to talk. For a moment, silence enveloped them. Jordan bit his lip, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's just clothes. I can wash them myself. I don't need anyone's help. The sheriff nodded, respecting the boy's hesitation. All right, I get it. But if things ever get too heavy, you know where to find me. He stood up, ready to leave, but he lingered for a moment longer, sensing an unseen weight on Jordan's shoulders that he wished he could lift. As he turned to leave, Jordan's voice broke through the air, hesitant and vulnerable. Sheriff. Yes. Thompson turned back, surprised by the boy's change in demeanor. Thanks for checking on me. Anytime, kid. The sheriff smiled, feeling a mix of concern and admiration for the young man before him. He stepped out into the cool night, his mind racing with unanswered questions about Jordan's life and the burdens he carried. The next day, Sheriff Thompson couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. He found himself driving through town, his thoughts consumed by the boy's evasive answers and the sadness behind his eyes. It was clear that there was something deeper going on, something hidden beneath the surface. He needed to find out more. His first stop was the local diner, a hub of gossip and community chatter. Sheriff Thompson leaned against the counter, sipping a cup of coffee as he engaged the waitress, a woman named Linda who had lived in town her entire life. Have you heard anything about Jordan? He asked casually, trying to gauge her reaction. Linda paused, her hands busy wiping down the counter. That boy? Poor thing. I see him at the laundromat all the time. It's like he's there every night. Yeah, I noticed that too, Thompson replied, his curiosity piqued. Do you know why he's always there? She sighed, shaking her head slowly. I think his family's been struggling. I heard his mother got sick a while back and things haven't been easy for them. The sheriff felt a pang of sympathy. Sick? What kind of illness? Not sure, really. People don't talk much about it. You know how it is. But I've seen her come into the diner now and then. She looks frail, and Jordan, he's always so quiet, always trying to help her out. Thompson nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. So, he's been taking care of her? Seems like it, Linda confirmed, her expression turning serious. That boy's got a lot on his plate. It's hard to watch. Sheriff Thompson's heart ached for Jordan. The boy was not just washing his clothes. He was trying to keep himself and his mother afloat in a sea of hardship. As he finished his coffee, he resolved to check in on the boy's mother. He needed to know more about their situation and see if there was anything he could do to help. Later that evening, Thompson found himself at the laundromat again. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as he stepped inside. The rhythmic sound of clothes tumbling in the dryers provided a comforting backdrop, but tonight, his heart was heavy with concern. He spotted Jordan once more, this time sitting on a folding chair, staring blankly at the machines. The boy looked lost in thought, his expression distant. Sheriff Thompson approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. Hey, Jordan, he said softly. Jordan's head snapped up, and for a split second, relief washed over his features before it was quickly replaced by uncertainty. Sheriff, mind if I sit? The sheriff gestured to the seat next to him. Jordan shrugged, a silent invitation. As Thompson settled down, he felt the weight of the conversation looming. I talked to some folks in town today, he began, watching Jordan's reaction closely. The boy stiffened, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. Oh, they mentioned that your mom's been sick, Thompson said gently, trying to navigate the sensitive topic. How is she doing? Jordan's expression darkened, the vulnerability he had shown earlier quickly retreating behind a wall of stoicism. She's fine, he replied, too quickly. Jordan, Thompson pressed, it's okay to talk about it. I'm here to help if you need it. For a moment, it seemed as if Jordan might crack, the tension in his jaw easing slightly as he looked at the sheriff. But then he shook his head, determination replacing the flicker of uncertainty. I said she's fine. I've just come here to wash our clothes. That's all. The sheriff sighed, realizing how deeply rooted Jordan's defenses were. You don't have to carry everything alone, you know. It's okay to ask for help. Jordan's eyes flashed with defiance. I'm not asking for anything, Sheriff. I can take care of my mom and myself. The sheriff admired the boy's strength, but also recognized the burden that came with it. I get that you're strong, but even the strongest people need others sometimes. You don't have to be the only one fighting. Jordan's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight leaving him momentarily. I just don't want to be a burden, he murmured, vulnerability creeping back into his voice. You're not a burden, Jordan. You're a kid trying to do your best in a tough situation. It's all right to let others in. The boy seemed to consider this, his gaze drifting to the machines that hummed softly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared understanding. As the minutes passed, Sheriff Thompson realized that this conversation was just the beginning. He would need to navigate the complexities of Jordan's life carefully to earn his trust and help him find the support he so desperately needed. With a heavy heart, the sheriff finally stood up, giving Jordan a reassuring nod. I'll be around, all right? Just remember, you're not alone in this. As he walked towards the exit, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that he had only scratched the surface of Jordan's struggles. The boy's resilience was admirable, but it was also a sign of the burdens he carried, burdens that he yearned to lighten. Outside, the night air was crisp, and the stars twinkled overhead, a stark contrast to the heaviness in the sheriff's heart. He knew he had to dig deeper, to find a way to reach Jordan and his family. There was a community of people who cared, and it was time to rally them. His mind raced with thoughts about how to approach the situation, how to create a network of support for the boy he had come to care for. As the sun hung low in the sky as Sheriff Thompson drove toward the local high school, the tires of his cruiser crunching over gravel as he pulled into the parking lot. He had spent the previous day gathering information about Jordan, and now it was time to put some of it to the test. As he stepped out of the vehicle, the warm afternoon air enveloped him, but a chill ran down his spine at the thought of what he might discover. He had watched the boy from a distance, intrigued and concerned, but now he felt a sense of urgency. Something was off in Jordan's life, and it was his duty to get to the bottom of it. The school was bustling with students, their laughter and chatter echoing through the hallways. Sheriff Thompson walked through the main entrance, his badge gleaming in the fluorescent lights. He approached the front desk, where his secretary sat, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she processed forms. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "I'm looking to speak with some of Jordan's teachers. Do you know where I could find them?" The secretary looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Jordan? Jordan Wells? He's a good kid. I can help you with that. Just head down to room 204. His English teacher, Mr. Collins, should be there." "Thank you," the sheriff replied, making his way through the labyrinth of lockers and classrooms, feeling the weight of the eyes that occasionally glanced his way. He arrived at room 204 and knocked gently on the door, which swung open almost immediately. "Sheriff Thompson," Mr. Collins exclaimed, a smile breaking across his face. "What brings you here?" "Thank you for your time, Mr. Collins. I'm here about Jordan Wells. I've noticed he's been coming to the laundromat quite a bit lately, and I wanted to know if you could share anything about him." "Of course," Mr. Collins said, ushering the sheriff inside. The classroom was filled with posters of great literary works and student projects, a warm atmosphere that felt welcoming. "Jordan is one of my brightest students. He's incredibly dedicated, often staying late to finish his assignments." Sheriff Thompson leaned against a desk, crossing his arms as he listened intently. "That's good to hear, but I've also noticed he comes to school in worn-out clothes. Is there something going on at home?" Mr. Collins's expression shifted, a hint of concern flitting across his features. Jordan is dealing with a lot. He's a strong kid, but I've heard from other teachers that his family is struggling financially. He never complains, though. He just keeps pushing through. The sheriff felt a pang in his chest. And he's doing well in school? Very well, Mr. Collins affirmed. He's got a knack for writing and analysis, and I truly believe he could go far if given the right opportunities. But sometimes, I worry that his home life may affect him more than he lets on. Thank you for sharing that, Sheriff Thompson said, his mind racing. He thought about the boy who had sat alone in the laundromat, folding clothes meticulously. I appreciate your honesty. Is there anything more I should know? Any resources available for him? Honestly, the school does have programs, but they often require parental consent, and I'm not sure how involved his mother is, Mr. Collins replied, looking contemplative. If you're concerned, maybe you could reach out to social services or the school counselor. They might have more insight. Sheriff Thompson nodded, his resolve strengthening. I think I will. Thank you for your time, Mr. Collins. As he left the classroom, the sheriff felt a mixture of empathy and determination. He couldn't shake the image of Jordan's slight frame, the way he clutched his books to his chest as if they were a lifeline. It was clear that the boy was fighting battles that weren't visible on the surface. The sheriff headed back to his vehicle, but instead of driving away, he found himself parked outside the laundromat once more. The neon sign flickered softly in the twilight, and the familiar hum of washing machines filled the air. He stepped inside, the door chimes ringing out a welcome. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on Jordan, who sat at a folding table, staring intently at the machines as they churned. The boy looked lost in thought, his fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of a well-worn book. The sheriff approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. Hey there, Jordan, he greeted gently, taking a seat across from him. Jordan looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he offered a hesitant smile. Sheriff, what's up? I just wanted to check on you again, Thompson said, his voice warm but firm. I've been thinking about our last conversation. Jordan's brow furrowed slightly. Oh, right. Thompson leaned in a bit, noticing the shadows under Jordan's eyes. I visited your school today. Your teachers had some great things to say about you. They really admire your dedication. Thanks, Jordan murmured, his gaze dropping back to the washing machines, which spun rhythmically. I try my best. The sheriff felt a swell of compassion. It was evident that Jordan was proud of his work ethic, but there was also a heaviness about him, a burden that seemed far too great for someone so young. I understand that things have been tough for you. You don't have to share anything you don't want to, but I'm here to help if you need it. Jordan glanced up, his expression a mix of vulnerability and defiance. I can handle it, he replied quietly, though the tremor in his voice suggested otherwise. Sometimes, it's okay not to handle everything on your own, the sheriff said, his tone gentle. You don't have to bear it all by yourself. For a moment, silence enveloped them, punctuated only by the whirring of the machines. Jordan's eyes flicked back to the floor, his shoulders tense. I don't want to bother anyone. Everyone has their problems. The sheriff shook his head, feeling the weight of Jordan's words. You're not a bother, Jordan. You're just a kid dealing with some tough stuff. Everyone deserves help, and it takes a strong person to ask for it. Jordan hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the pages of his book. It's just clothes, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm just washing the few I have. The sheriff's heart ached at the simplicity and sadness of the statement. And what about school? Are you managing? Yep, Jordan replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I get by. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He wanted to reach out, to tell Jordan that he was more than just the clothes he wore or the struggles he faced. But something held him back, the fear of pushing too hard, of overstepping boundaries. Sometimes it's hard to keep up appearances, he said gently. But I want you to know that it's okay to lean on others. You have people who care about you, even if it doesn't feel that way. Jordan finally looked him in the eye, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, passing between them. I don't want pity. Not pity, Jordan. Support, the sheriff corrected softly. There's a big difference. I'm not here to judge you or to make you feel bad. I just want to understand and help. The boy's gaze dropped again. I appreciate that, but I'm okay. Really? Sheriff Thompson studied him, trying to gauge the truth behind his words. He could see the determination in Jordan's eyes, but he could also sense the exhaustion that came from carrying so much on his shoulders. I'll be around if you need someone to talk to, the sheriff said, standing up and offering a reassuring smile. You're not alone in this, okay? Jordan nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful but guarded. Thanks, Sheriff. As the sheriff walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was only scratching the surface of Jordan's reality. There was a world of hurt hidden beneath the boy's resilient exterior, and it was a world that needed attention. The laundromat continued to hum around him, the smell of detergent hanging in the air. But for the sheriff, the atmosphere had shifted. He was no longer just an observer. He was becoming a part of Jordan's story, and he was determined to make a difference. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, a sense of urgency filled him. The challenges that Jordan faced were not simply personal. They were a reflection of a community that needed to do better. The sheriff's heart was heavy with the knowledge that many kids like Jordan were slipping through the cracks, quietly suffering while the world turned a blind eye. Tonight, he would take action. He would reach out to local resources, to organizations that could provide support. He would not let this boy's quiet struggle go unnoticed. The sheriff knew that sometimes all it took was one person to stand up and say enough was enough. Determined, he climbed into his cruiser, ready to make calls and advocate for a young boy who was fighting a battle far too complex for him to face alone. As the engine roared to life, Sheriff Thompson felt a sense of purpose fill him, one that would not only help Jordan, but could spark change in the town he served. Sheriff Thompson stood at the entrance of the laundromat, his heart racing as he prepared to confront Jordan about the boy's nightly visits. The familiar hum of the washing machines filled the air, a soothing backdrop to the tension in his mind. He spotted Jordan sitting in a corner, surrounded by baskets of clothes, folding them with the care of someone who understood the weight of responsibility. The boy's brow was furrowed in concentration, and for a moment, the sheriff hesitated. He wasn't just a lawman. He was a father, a member of the community, and he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him as he approached. "Hey, Jordan," Sheriff Thompson called out, his voice steady but gentle, as if he were trying to coax a frightened animal out of hiding. Jordan looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Sheriff," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He quickly straightened, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Mind if I sit?" The sheriff gestured to a nearby chair, and when Jordan nodded, he took a seat across from him. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the soft swish of clothes tumbling in the dryer and the rhythmic thud of the washing machines. "I've been meaning to ask you," Sheriff Thompson began, searching for the right words. "I've seen you here a lot lately. What's going on? Why do you come here every night?" Jordan's gaze dropped to the floor, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I have to wash my clothes," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. The sheriff leaned in slightly, sensing the boy's discomfort. "You're washing your clothes? Is that all?" Jordan hesitated, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "Yeah, I need to have something clean for school," he finally admitted, his voice cracking. Sheriff Thompson felt a pang of sorrow for the boy. "How many clothes do you have, Jordan?" he asked gently, trying to draw him out. "Not many," Jordan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just a couple of shirts and some pants." He paused, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mom gets sick a lot, and we don't have much money. I just want to look decent when I go to school." The sheriff's heart sank. He had suspected there was more to Jordan's story than met the eye, but hearing it spoken aloud was a different matter entirely. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said softly. "It must be tough." Jordan nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "It's okay, I manage," he said, attempting to sound brave, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Do you have anyone helping you at home?" Thompson pressed, wanting to understand the full picture. "No," Jordan replied, shaking his head. "It's just me and my mom. I have to help her out, you know? She tries to keep things together, but sometimes..." His voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard, tears forming in his eyes. Sheriff Thompson felt a lump in his throat. "You're doing a great job, Jordan. I can see how hard you're trying," he said, wanting to offer some comfort. "But you don't have to do it alone. There are resources in town that can help." Jordan's expression shifted from sadness to defiance. "I don't need help," he insisted, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I can take care of us. I'm used to it." The sheriff studied the boy, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes. "I understand that, but accepting help doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're smart enough to know when you need it," he replied, trying to convey the importance of community support. "I just don't want to be a burden," Jordan said, his voice trembling. "My mom already worries too much." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. "Jordan, you're not a burden. You're a kid trying to do the best you can. And I think your mom would want you to reach out for help when you need it." The laundromat was quiet except for the machines and the occasional rustle of fabric. Jordan looked away, staring at the floor, clearly torn between pride and the reality of their situation. "Listen," Thompson continued, "I know it's hard to ask for help, but there are food banks, community programs. I can connect you with people who can help your mom. You shouldn't have to do this alone." Jordan's eyes filled with tears, and he quickly brushed them away. "I just want to keep her safe," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't want her to worry about anything else." "I get that," the sheriff responded, his heart aching for the boy. "But sometimes taking care of someone means letting others help. You're not just looking out for her. You're looking out for yourself too. You deserve a break." Jordan remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if he were wrestling with a decision that felt too heavy for his young shoulders. The sheriff watched him, wanting to reach out and offer comfort, but knowing that the boy needed to come to terms with this on his own. "Just think about it, okay?" Sheriff Thompson said finally, standing up. "I'm here if you want to talk more. You can always find me at the station." Jordan nodded, his expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thanks, Sheriff," he murmured, his voice still shaky. As the sheriff turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that their conversation had changed something between them. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just as a lawman, but as a member of the community who cared deeply about its youth. The next evening, as Jordan folded his clothes under the harsh fluorescent lights of the laundromat, he felt the weight of the sheriff's words pressing on his mind. He had spent countless nights here, but tonight felt different. The sheriff had been kind, and for the first time, he had seen Jordan not just as a teenager in need, but as a person worthy of help and support. Jordan sighed, throwing a shirt into the basket with more force than necessary. He wanted to be strong for his mom, to show her that he could handle everything on his own. But the truth was, he felt stretched thin. It was exhausting to juggle school, work, and caring for her while keeping up appearances. The thought of asking for help made his stomach twist in knots, but the sheriff's words lingered, a whisper of possibility. Suddenly, the door to the laundromat swung open, and Jordan looked up to see Sheriff Thompson stepping inside. The sheriff's face was serious, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made Jordan feel a flicker of hope. "Hey, Jordan," Thompson greeted him, moving toward the folding table where the boy was working. "Mind if I sit down for a minute?" Jordan nodded, unsure of what to expect. He felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "What's up, Sheriff?" "I wanted to talk to you about something," Thompson said, his tone earnest. "I've been thinking about your situation. It's clear you're doing your best to take care of your mom, but I wanted to let you know that there are people out there who want to help." Jordan's heart raced. "I told you, I don't need help," he insisted, his voice rising defensively. "Jordan, listen," Thompson said, leaning forward. "This isn't just about you. This is about your mom, too. I know you want to protect her, but you can't do it all on your own. You need support, and it's okay to ask for it." The boy clenched his fists, fighting back tears. "I just want her to be okay. I don't want her to have to worry about anything else," he repeated, his voice cracking. The sheriff sighed, understanding the depth of Jordan's feelings. "You love her, and that's commendable. But if you burn yourself out, you won't be able to help her at all. That's the last thing she would want." Jordan looked away, feeling overwhelmed by the sheriff's concern. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his tone softening slightly. "I can help connect you with local resources," Thompson offered. "There are food banks, community programs, and even some groups that provide assistance for families dealing with illness. You'd be surprised at how many people care and want to help." Jordan hesitated, weighing his options. The thought of reaching out for help was daunting, but the prospect of continuing to struggle alone felt even heavier. "I don't know," he started, but the sheriff interrupted gently. "Just think about it, okay?" Thompson said encouragingly. "You don't have to make a decision right now, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this." Jordan nodded slowly, his heart warmed by the sheriff's kindness. "Thanks, Sheriff," he whispered, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long while. As the sheriff stood to leave, he placed a reassuring hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You're a good kid, Jordan. Just remember, it's okay to lean on others. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." With that, Sheriff Thompson stepped out of the laundromat, leaving Jordan alone with his thoughts. The boy stared at the piles of clothes before him, contemplating the sheriff's words. For the first time, he felt a flicker of possibility, a chance to let someone in, to share the burden. Sheriff Thompson stood outside Jordan's home, hesitating for a moment as he looked up at the flickering light in the window. The small, modest house had seen better days. The peeling paint and overgrown weeds spoke of neglect and hardship. As he knocked on the door, he felt a mix of curiosity and concern. He had spent the past few days piecing together the fragments of Jordan's life, and now he was finally standing on the precipice of understanding. The door creaked open, revealing a woman who looked far older than her years. Her skin was drawn tight over her cheekbones, and her eyes, though warm, were shadowed with fatigue. Sheriff Thompson recognized her immediately. This was Jordan's mother. "Hello, Sheriff," she said, her voice soft but steady. "What brings you here?" "Good evening, ma'am," he replied, forcing a smile. "I wanted to check in on you and Jordan. I've been worried about him." She stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Please come in. I appreciate you looking out for him. It's been a challenging time for us." As he crossed the threshold, Thompson felt a wave of emotion wash over him. The interior of the house was dimly lit, with a few flickering bulbs struggling against the shadows. A small living room was cluttered with mismatched furniture, and the faint smell of something cooking wafted in from the kitchen. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, concern lacing his tone. She chuckled softly, but it was a weary sound. "Oh, I'm managing. Just tired, you know? Life has its way of wearing you down." Thompson nodded, sensing that there was more beneath the surface. As they settled into the worn-out couch, the sheriff's heart sank when he noticed the pile of unopened mail on the coffee table. Bills, notices, and reminders of a life that was slipping through their fingers. "Jordan's a good kid," he said, attempting to steer the conversation toward the boy. "He's been coming to the laundromat a lot lately. I think he's worried about you." She looked down, her fingers fidgeting with a frayed thread on her sleeve. "He thinks he's protecting me, but I worry about him too. I've been battling this illness for years now, and I've tried to keep it from him. I didn't want him to worry. I wanted him to focus on school, to have some semblance of a normal life." The sheriff's heart ached at her words. The weight of her struggles was palpable in the small room, and he could see the toll it had taken on her. "You don't have to go through this alone. There are resources available, programs that can help with medical costs, food assistance. I can help you connect with them." "No," she said, shaking her head firmly. "I can't do that to him. He's already carrying so much on his shoulders. I don't want to burden him with my problems." "But Mrs. Williams," he started, but she cut him off gently. "Please call me Sarah. Sarah, you're not a burden. Letting people know what you're going through doesn't make you weak. It shows strength. Jordan needs to know that it's okay to ask for help." Just then, a loud crash erupted from the kitchen, shattering the moment of vulnerability. Sheriff Thompson and Sarah exchanged glances, both startled. "Jordan," she called, her voice rising in alarm as she rushed to the kitchen. The sheriff followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. They found Jordan standing in the middle of the kitchen, his face twisted in panic. A pot had fallen from the counter, its contents spilling everywhere. He was frozen, staring down at the mess, his hands trembling. "Jordan, are you all right?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. "I am fine," he stammered, his eyes darting between the sheriff and his mother. I didn't mean to drop it. I was trying to help." Thompson knelt beside him, noting the way Jordan was trying to suppress his fear, but the boy was clearly shaken. "Hey, it's okay. Accidents happen. Why don't we clean this up together?" Jordan nodded, but the sheriff could see the conflict in his eyes, an internal battle between wanting to be strong and the overwhelming pressure of his situation. As they began to pick up the broken pieces of the pot, Thompson felt a surge of empathy for both mother and son. "Jordan," the sheriff said, trying to break the tension, "you're doing a great job helping your mom. It's not easy managing everything on your own." Jordan looked up, his expression softening a little. "I just want to make sure she's okay. I can't let her down." "You're not letting her down," Thompson reassured him. "You're doing everything you can. But remember, it's okay to lean on others too. You don't have to carry this weight alone." As they finished cleaning up the mess, Sarah watched her son with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She could see how hard he was trying to be the man of the house, and it broke her heart. "Jordan," she said softly, "you don't have to take care of everything by yourself. I'm here for you, and we can face this together." "But you're sick, Mom," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want you to worry about anything else." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, and she reached out to pull him into an embrace. "You're my son, and I'll always worry about you, no matter what. That's what mothers do." The sheriff stood back, feeling like an intruder in this intimate moment. But he knew that this was the turning point they all needed. "Listen," he said, breaking the silence. "I know it's hard to ask for help, but it's out there. There are people who want to support you. Let me assist you both. You don't have to do this alone." Jordan's eyes flicked to his mother, seeking her approval. "Mom," he asked hesitantly. Sarah sighed, knowing this was the moment to let go of her pride. Maybe it's time we let others in." As they stood together, the sheriff felt a sense of hope rising in his chest. This family was fighting a battle that had been hidden in the shadows for too long, and it was time to bring their struggles into the light. "How about we sit down and make a plan?" Sheriff Thompson suggested, his voice steady and calm. "We can figure out what you need and how we can get you the support you deserve." Jordan nodded slowly, and for the first time, a flicker of relief crossed his face. Sarah wiped her tears and smiled faintly, grateful for the sheriff's kindness. As they settled around the kitchen table, the atmosphere shifted from one of tension and fear to a blossoming sense of possibility. The sheriff began to outline local resources, his voice steady and reassuring. In that small, cluttered kitchen, amidst the remnants of a broken pot and the lingering shadows of illness and poverty, a new chapter was beginning for Jordan and his mother. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, they felt they were not alone. They had each other, and perhaps, with the help of a compassionate sheriff, they would find the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But as they began to discuss their needs and hopes, Sheriff Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something unspoken lingering in the air, something that would require even deeper understanding and connection. Just then, as they dove deeper into the conversation, the weight of unaddressed issues hung heavy, hinting at the complexities of life that still awaited them in the shadows. To be continued,